All right, so welcome and good evening. My name is Hillary and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the New York Transit Museum. The museum is located in downtown Brooklyn in a decommissioned IND subway station. Please come and visit. We are open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Before we get started, we do have some upcoming program announcements I wanted to tell you about. The biggest news is that our member sale for our popular Old City Hall tours is happening next Wednesday, January 14th, starting at 10 a.m. sharp. Now, we expect the sale to move quite quickly, so if you're hoping to snag tickets, make sure your museum membership is up to date. Also on sale are going to be some upcoming transit walks, including some old favorites like our tours of Grand Central and the 2nd Avenue Extension, as well as a couple of new tours. We're going to have a new tour of the design and history of Penn Station, and another one is going to be exploring downtown Brooklyn's transit history from ferries to subways. Now, any remaining tickets for these transit walks will open up to the general public on Friday the 16th. And also next Wednesday evening, we're hosting transit trivia at Fulton Hall in downtown Brooklyn. And so that's a great option for those who are local and like a little competition. Now, the best way to stay in the know about our programs is to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter, and I'll share some links for you to do just that. Now for our program this evening, if you would like captions, click on the menu item that says CC Show Captions. If you don't see that at the bottom of your screen, hit those 3 dots where it says More, and you should see more options. We'll also have time for Q&A at the end of the program, so please feel free to add in your questions using that Q&A function. I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's presenter, David Seltzer. David is a former investment banker and financial advisor who has assembled bond issues for transportation agencies around the country, including New York MTA. He has ridden over 50 subway systems throughout the world, from Buenos Aires to Helsinki to Sydney, as well as his hometown of Philadelphia. And he recently published Transit Tourism, the iconic art and design of 22 subway stations around the world, which is on sale in our store. And I'll share the link for you all. But now I'll hand it over to you, David.
All right. Well, thank you, Hillary. And as a Philadelphian, it's always somewhat intimidating to talk to an audience, largely New Yorkers, about subways. But I'll do my best, and that you may be able to draw some interesting comparisons between New York and the 21 other cities in the book Transit Tourism that I canvassed. And we think of New York as being the biggest, most complex system in the world. And for many years it was. I think it's still number one in terms of station count. I believe it's about 472 stations, but it actually ranks number 9 in terms of ridership worldwide and number 14 in terms of route mileage. So other systems, particularly in East Asia, have really grown dramatically in the last 15 or 20 years. Many books have been written about taking wonderful trips by railway or scenic road trips like Route 66, even canal boat tours. But oddly, or maybe not so oddly, no travel books had been written about sightseeing inside subways until transit tourism. So that is what motivated me to write this book. And it's really not so much about the historical or technical or operational aspects of subways, but rather their visual culture, the rider experience. And when I was looking around for a literary agent, unsuccessfully, I might add, the response I got was, your book seems to be genre defying. And I think that meant they couldn't figure out whether it would belong in a bookshop on the travel writing shelves, or architecture and design, or history, transportation history. There's even a bit of personal memoir in what I've written, and probably no small measure of self-help. Maybe the only literary category lacking is Ramzan. But for writing my book, for research, I really drew heavily upon my own book collection. I have nearly 500 books I've been collecting since I was a child, all about subways. And this is the tip of the iceberg that you see in this image. Many of the books following my interest in the visual culture do deal with the art and architecture. And what you're looking at here are covers of some of the books, starting on the top, Art No Metro, that's about Sao Paulo. And then in the middle, Hong Kong, MTR, obviously the wonderful series of books about New York's art installations, Brussels, Stockholm, and so forth. So these are, I'd say, a quarter of my collection is about the design and architecture of the metros. I have a particular interest in maps. Those of you who were tuned in August for the Transit Museum's webinar heard Mark Ovenden give a phenomenal talk about his new book, Iconic Transit Maps, and I have several of his previous books. There's also the Vignelli map of New York, which has, I guess, been revived in a way with the new subway map. And I have a series of books about the London Underground map designed by Harry Beck. I even have some books getting into the obscure area of typefaces and fonts, including Edward Johnston and the famous London Underground typeface that many of you are familiar with, as well as the ubiquitous Helvetica that we see in the New York City subway system. But in addition to my books, there's tremendous resources online, and these are some of the websites that I consulted and relied upon as I was doing my own research for transit tourism. And that one called Metroliner in the middle row on the left is particularly interesting. They show video representations of the growth of several dozen different subways over time, and you can see how the different systems have blossomed. And there's just great resources there. Cardo Metro shows detailed track maps, and then Reese Martin has a wonderful YouTube series where he gives his analysis of different worldwide subway and metro systems. But of course, it comes down to boots on the ground and doing primary research by riding on the trains themselves. And these are just some of the pocket maps that I would take with me going around to the cities that are reflected in the book. But I think the initial question is, what makes a transit line a subway or a metro? And I do use those two terms interchangeably. And I, for my own purposes, cited 5 criteria. First, obviously, has to be in a metropolitan, large, dense area, an urban community. It has to be on rail, so a bus tunnel with stations like the one in South Boston wouldn't qualify for my book because it's not a subway. It has to be at least partially underground. The ones that are entirely above ground don't hold as much interest for me, and we can get into that a little later, why I feel that way. There should be multiple stations, not just a tunnel segment, but a minimum of, say, 4 different stops to make it a bona fide underground. So Pittsburgh has maybe 5 or 6 stations underground, largely above ground, but that one qualified in my definition. It's sort of an infield fly rule test I apply. And then lastly, it could be what's called heavy rail, which is like the New York City subway, or light rail, which are trolleys or streetcars like the Green Line in Boston. But those are distinguished from commuter rail, even though some commuter rail lines run underground for a portion of the route. In the book, I have a two-facing page table that charts the development of subways worldwide, starting with 1863 the London Underground, the Metropolitan, and then the District line there. There was a gap of about 20 years. And but by the way, the cities that are shown in all caps in this diagram or this chart are ones that have a chapter in my book. But you'll see there's probably 10 or 11 cities here by the 1930s that had built subways. And then there was a gap during the 40s with the Second World War. But afterwards, there was a dramatic expansion as urbanization increased and traffic worsened in large cities. So on this chart, the cities that are in red are ones that are located in China. The first one was Beijing in the early 70s. The cities that are in green are in India. The first one there was in the 1980s in Calcutta. And as you look at the decades go on, you'll see the preponderance of green and red typeface on the list of cities. And I'd say in the last 15 years, probably 3/4 of the new systems that have been built, and we're talking here about new systems rather than expansions of existing systems, but 3/4 of the new systems have been in India or China. And I think China now has close to 50 cities with subways. It's really quite remarkable. By the way, I think the most recent one when I finished writing the book a year or so ago was Quito in Ecuador, which has the highest elevation subway in the world at something like 9,300 feet, taking into account it's being underground. So the concept or premise of my book is that every subway system, every metro says something intrinsic or emblematic about the nature or character of the city that it serves. So each of the cities here with the orange dots are ones that there's a chapter about in my book. And I'm not going to go through 22 cities in the time we have allotted here. You'll have to read the book to find that out. But to give you an example, like I would say Boston, how does that subway reflect the character of the city? Well, it's very quirky and irregular and traditional, yet also has very modernistic elements. And that reflects my view of what Boston is like. Montreal has a certain Gallic stylishness to it. It's very elegant and brimming with self-confidence, Montreal's metro. Naples, I would say, is theatrical, the station design there, much as you think of Neapolitan music and theater as being very theatrical. Mexico City, very historical references to the nation and that capital city's history. So that's the theme running through the book. Now, this map shows in green the other cities that I've visited, and I've tried to, in my book, I've visited every city that I've written about but one. I figure travel writers should probably visit the places that they're traveling and writing about. I had a trip all arranged, including tours of the Moscow metro, and then the pandemic hit, and then after that, the invasion of Ukraine. I thought it ill-advised to go to Moscow, but that is definitely one that I want to ride in the future. But in recent years, I've been in Sydney's that just opened, and some of these other cities besides Tokyo in Japan. So with each chapter, I have this semi-scientific ranking system, the Seltzer token ranking system. Now, these are not non-fungible tokens. These are the old-fashioned fungible tokens, 1 to 4, based on 4 criteria. The convenience, how well does it serve the city, the subway system? Ease of use, as a newcomer to a city, how user-friendly is the system to get around. the quality of the design, both the architecture and the art installations, as well as the wayfinding, the graphics. And then the last and most subjective is the personality of the system. And again, how well does it really capture the unique flavor of the city it serves? So just in terms of ease of use, I was in Gwangju, South Korea. They have a one-line subway there. And unlike Seoul, where everything's bilingual in English and Korean, I walked into the subway station there, and there was a complicated machine there. It was all in Korean characters, which I don't read. I was trying to figure out how to get a vending card or a fare card out of the vending machine. And I was stumped. And a young couple came in, Korean couple. I asked them if they spoke English. They said yes. And I said, I'm having trouble getting my fare card out of this machine. And they looked at me and said, well, that's a book vending machine that you're in front of. The actual fare vending machine is down the steps closer to the platform. So that Gwangju would get low marks in terms of ease of use in my token ranking system. So if we're talking about the visual experience of riding the subway, what are the attributes of that? And there's really 5 that I use in the book. The architecture, both the stations themselves and the entrances, the rail cars or rolling stock, the maps, the logo that the system uses to identify itself, and the lettering, the typeface, and then perhaps most interestingly, the artwork and historical installations that are incorporated into the stations. So we'll briefly go through, I'll cite a couple of examples from each. So starting with the station architecture at the entrances. So some systems do have fairly uniform or emblematic statements of entry, I'll call them. New York, it's now, I know, being phased out somewhat, but the colored globes indicating whether originally back in the day there was a cashier there or it was exit only and so forth. Washington, D.C., below that, has these canopies that they belatedly put up over the escalators, which were open to the elements and always breaking down. So the canopies are now part of Washington's visual culture for the metro. The Paris Metro has the Hector Guimard Art Nouveau kiosks. They're not everywhere. I think there's maybe 60 or 70 stations perhaps that still have them, but they're absolutely gorgeous. And there's one in the courtyard of the Museum of Modern Art in New York on display as artwork. London has a couple of distinctive station entrances. These, for the earlier lines, like the Piccadilly line with the oxblood terracotta, there's about 40 stations that use that as a visual reference. I think we're looking at Covent Garden Station there. And then Moscow, they don't have any uniform look, but some of the station entrances are as grand as the stations beneath them, which themselves are spectacular. And oftentimes it would be a different architect who would do the entrance kiosk in Moscow as opposed to the station beneath it. And the stations themselves at platform level, some of the systems do have a consistent house style that's used at multiple stations, so a signature look. So Washington, D.C. has the coffered ceilings that are reminiscent of the Capitol Rotunda or the Jefferson Memorial or even Union Station itself. And the first generation of the Washington Metro used that pretty consistently. London, of course, with the tunnel bored tubes, has the tubular construction, which gave its name to the term tube is used even for the cut and cover lines in London. And Stockholm has, of its 100 stations, I think 20 of them are so-called cave stations that were blasted out of granite, but rather than finished with some steel or other material, the transit agency there commissioned artists to do cave paintings used on sprayed concrete on the rough granite, exposed granite. So really a very, very distinctive look in Stockholm. Other subway systems have different architecture for each of the stations, maybe even different architects. So here's two from Moscow. These were built in the late 30s, very grandiose and almost bourgeois looking, which is kind of ironic. This was in the heart of the Stalin era, very rough time there in the 30s, but these were built as palaces for the people and magnificent. They were intended to look like the Louvre. And I often draw the distinction between Moscow, where the stations look like the Louvre, and some of the subway stations in the US that are more reminiscent of the Louvre. But Moscow is really terrific, St. Petersburg as well. So those are two cities I absolutely have to visit. Montreal is another city that used different architects for most of its stations. It was built in the 1966 in anticipation of Expo 67. So it's now 60 years old, but still very fresh looking, very contemporary, and really wonderful, wonderful experience riding the Montreal Metro. Then in my travels, I would occasionally come across stations that looked like they were separated at birth. So, for example, on the left, Budapest. Budapest is the oldest system in continental Europe. 1896 it was built. In fact, there was actually a royal subway carriage that went down the 3 or 4 mile length of it. I don't know that any other system had a royal subway carriage, but it reminds me on the left there, the Budapest system, of an Edwardian men's locker room. The tile, the wood finishes, the acanthus sleeves on the beams, really handsome looking in a Gilded Age sort of way. And then when I was visiting Buenos Aires a couple of years ago, their system is a little younger. I think it was built in 1913, but it looked almost identical, the same beige tile and columns and decoration. So it's very uncanny that they looked so much alike. More recently, visiting Munich, they had a station there that I also saw in Budapest use the same multicolor panel system. It was the one in Budapest was built 10 years afterwards, 15 years afterwards, maybe 2015 versus 2003 for Munich, but different architects completely. But these are some of the things you pick up as you're traveling around. Now, I know many people who tune into the Transit Museum programs are particularly interested in the rail cars or the rolling stock, as it's called. But for me, that didn't hold as much interest as the station architecture. I found in my travels, say comparing Istanbul to Buenos Aires to Tokyo, the cars looked pretty much alike. There wasn't that much different about them, with the exception of one city, and that was Glasgow. And Glasgow has a very small system built right after Budapest, 1897. It's a circular line with 15 stops, and it's very, very small. The Glaswegians, who have kind of a cheeky sense of humor, call it the world's largest model railway. And that's not a bad reference for it. That guy who sort of stooped over standing in the aisle, he's not a basketball player. He's probably 5'10", and he can't stand upright in the cars because they're so, the tunnels and the cars within them are so tiny. Maps have a particular interest for me. because I think they say how the system views itself and presents itself to the public. So many of you heard Mark Ovenden's talk. He spent quite a bit of time on the London Underground, and you can see on the left how shambolic the map looked in the early 30s until this guy who I guess was trained as an electrical engineer, Harry Beck, on his own, he wasn't asked to do it, came up with the first schematic map for a transit line. And that has become such an influential factor in systems around the world. Many of the maps really are derived from the revolutionary work that Harry Beck had done, where it's not geographically accurate. It's instead intended to help with wayfinding by not showing every turn and curve or distance between the stations, but just showing the sequence of stops and making the interchange stations very, very visible. And you can see even today, the top is a portion in the central London of the London Underground map. And then Madrid, which we'll come to in a moment, has a map that looks almost indistinguishable. If you didn't look at the place names, you could think that that was also a portion of the London Underground map. And many, many systems do owe a stylistic debt to that work that Harry Beck had done in the 30s. So here on these shores, Boston has always had a fairly extensive subway and at one point elevated system. And on the left, they did show every turn and twist where the lines seem to follow the cow paths that apocryphally led to the street system in Boston, but very difficult to read, particularly for a newcomer to Boston. And then there was a makeover in the mid-60s. The transit agency, which had been the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, was reconstituted as a much larger regional agency and renamed the MBTA, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. And one of the first things that MBTA did, the T, as it's now called, was bring in an architectural firm, Cambridge 7, to do a makeover of their old system. And Boston was the first subway in the US, 1897, I think it was, and showing its age. And the first thing they did was smooth out the map by doing a schematic map depicted on the right that does derive from the London Underground schematic map. But they also did the stations, color coding the lines, a lot of things that now systems do routinely. But it was really a wonderful makeover. And again, that was 60 years ago. It's beginning to show its age a little bit as that system needs continual upgrading. But it was really intended to give a new look to an old system. Some of the maps are very simple. Obviously, Glasgow, just one circular line. And one of the things I learned when I had my tour of the Glasgow subway, and they don't call it the Underground or the tube there, they call it the subway. The architecture students have a custom of having a pint of beer at each of the stations along the Glasgow Circle line, and then at a pub above, and then getting on and riding again. And I guess the good news is that if you miss your stop after being overserved, you know the train will come around again to wherever your final destination is. Tokyo, a very complex system, 13 lines, 286 stations, I think it is. But they've done a very good job of simplifying it by giving um, um, Arabic numbers and Roman letters to each of the stations. So even if you can't pronounce the names that have been transliterated into to Roman characters, you can still find your way around by just saying you want to go from the Ginza line 3 to some other line, station 12. Some of the maps are very elegant, others are very odd. So on the left, Moscow, now the largest system in Europe. It's beautifully rendered here, completely schematic. The only geographic identifier, and it's hard for you to see that on your screens, there's a little red star in the very, very center of the map where the Kremlin is located. But it shows two concentric circle lines and all the branch lines going out of it. It's really, as an urban design matter, uh, absolutely beautiful. Then there's Mexico City. Now, they may have recently revised it, but when I was there a couple of years ago, this was still the map that was in use. It looks like it might have started out as a schematic map, but then someone put it into the washing machine and then high heat spin dry, and it came out all crinkled or rumpled. And I never quite understood why they'd show all the irregularities in the system. It doesn't really benefit the rider at all in terms of legibility. Logos and lettering are another identifier for subway systems. Many of them use the letter M. So going from the left, that's the Istanbul Metro, and now a huge system they've been building very, very aggressively. There's probably 10 different lines now. It's got to be one of the largest in Europe if you consider Istanbul Europe as opposed to Asia. LA Metro, the Mexico City system from 1968 that was built for the Olympics. The Italian systems use a white M on a red square. The very sturdy Cyrillic looking Moscow M, the more elegant Paris Metro M, and the Washington Metro logo. Most of them, I would say, look very masculine and streamlined as logos. And the one outlier that I came across, Brussels, very strange looking, almost Zoftig logo, maybe one too many Belgian chocolates or something. It looks kind of bloated. It just seems very odd that a transit agency would use that that sort of logo for their emblem. It seemed odd to me. Madrid is unusual in using a diagonal for its logo, although Barcelona uses a variant of it. And the Madrid system was built in the teens, and it was based on the Paris Metro, which opened in 1901, and the London Underground, which I said opened in the 1860s and was expanded through the 1890s and into the turn of the century. And Madrid's system has certain features of Paris architecturally, like the stations are curved and white tiled, but it has features of London as well, where the systems are on the trains go on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. And I always thought the logo type also reflected Paris and London. It looks almost like that diamond-shaped logo is a love child of the Paris Metro and the London Underground, Roundel. Stockholm, 1950, introduced the letter T for, in Swedish, I think it's tunnelbana for tunnel train, but transit, transportation, travel. And Cambridge 7 in Boston, when they did their system, paid homage to Stockholm, recognized the value of that. And now the Boston system, for years, has been known and refers to itself as the T. Montreal uses a single arrow for its logo pointing down. Sao Paulo uses two arrows up and down, and most of them are sort of face on and fairly clear emblems like that. New York is unusual in using an oblique angle to look. It's almost you're looking at the side of the train there. It's the only one I've seen in my travels. And then if New York is oblique, then Paris is abstruse. That logo there for the RATP, the operator, is intended to, according to their literature, convey two things. One is it's a simplified representation of the River Seine and the peripheral boulevard around Paris, but it's also supposed to be the profile of someone thinking aspirationally. So that is a very, very abstract image for a transit logo. Lettering is the other way that systems differentiate themselves. So Boston introduced Helvetica into the US, I would say, and certainly in terms of transportation signage. It's now ubiquitous for airports and all over. New York, and that was in the mid 60s with Cambridge 7. New York, for its makeover with Massimo Vignelli and Bob Norda, introduced Helvetica, not all caps, but initial caps. And that has proven very helpful, particularly to Auslanders like me who get confused going from the IND to the IRT and so forth. Their signage is really very, very helpful. And as you saw earlier, there's a book about the use of the Helvetica for the signage in New York. London, those of you who've been there recognize the distinctive typeface showing on the words Piccadilly line there. That's Edward Johnston. That's from 1916. And it's become so commonplace, not just for the underground, but for all sorts of public signage and British Rail and other institutions, that it's nicknamed the handwriting of London, the Johnston typeface, Edward Johnston. And the man of letters, Samuel Johnson, in the 18th century, famously said, when a man is tired of London, he's tired of life. Well, for me, as an underground rider, when a man is tired of Johnston, he's tired of London. Mexico City uses a typeface called Tipo Metro, designed by, I think he's a New Yorker, Lance Wyman, and it looks sort of like the lettering from 2001, A Space Odyssey, very futuristic looking. And I haven't really seen that anywhere else other than Mexico City. And then Paris has both its classic Art Nouveau lettering from the Metropolitan, and they developed a new typeface, Parisine, that is now used for most of the system. And a number of systems have done their own bespoke lettering. Montreal, even my hometown of Philadelphia, has developed a lettering typeface unique to the system. But I think to me, the most interesting thing is the art installations and historical artifacts that are shown there. So those of us who are familiar with the kind of tired looking tile work that one sees in the older subway systems in the US that looks, I'll call it neo-lavatorial in design, it's striking how inventive tile can look if it's done tastefully. So Brussels has some really striking looking tile installations like this one here. And then below that, in Istanbul, Turkey is renowned for its Iznik tiles. Iznik is maybe 60 or 70 miles south of Istanbul. And they've used that, that's a 400-year-old tile work tradition that has been revived and is being used in many of the stations to show the Levantine character of the Istanbul metro. So you really have a strong sense of place when you're there. Mexico City is the city of murals. Diego Rivera. Now, he didn't do any in the metro itself, but there are many other famous muralists who have done wall murals, extensive, immersive wall murals in Mexico City. The one on the left is showing the mythical foundation of Mexico City rendered throughout the station. And then more whimsically on the right, that's Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires, they call their subway system the Sub-T, S-U-B-T-E. It's sort of like mate. It's something I think you have to be from Buenos Aires to really fully appreciate. But they have some really clever, humorous design work that they've done in their recently remodeled system. And that's well worth a visit if you ever go to Buenos Aires. Very stylish, just like the city itself. I think the four most interesting systems in terms of extensive immersive artwork, at least the ones in the book that are represented, are Stockholm, for starters, with the cave stations. And that station there is called Kungstrad Garden. It actually, when they were excavating, they found the ruins of a 17th century palace, and some of the artifacts are displayed there underground in a cave station. And Stockholm, again, absolutely marvelous. They call themselves the metro there, the world's longest art gallery because it extends throughout the system. Sao Paulo's system was built in sort of the brutalist style, starting in the mid-70s and 80s. So it's cement or poured concrete, I guess I should say, but they enliven it with really delightful contemporary murals. So it does not feel drab. It feels very vibrant, just like the city of Sao Paulo. So those two I would put right up there in terms of art quality. And then the other two, top of my list that are in the book, Brussels and Naples. And for Naples, it's a little hard maybe to read what you're looking at. That is a art installation along the platform by the artist Michelangelo Pistoletto. And he specializes in doing these so-called mirrored glass images where there's stainless, I think it's polished stainless steel, reflective, and he has life-size photo murals of individuals. So it's hard to tell the decals, looking at that, who are on the left side from the actual passengers on the right. But as a visitor to that station, you feel like you're part of the artwork. It's really, really marvelous. And actually, Brussels and Stockholm and Naples all publish art guidebooks to the subway system. And Naples has made their small metro actually a major tourist attraction. Then there are the historical monuments. So on the left, that's a temple at the Pino Suarez station near the Central Plaza in Mexico City that was excavated or discovered when they were excavating the station. And that's right in the concourse there. Then in the middle photograph is a Roman temple, 1st century AD, that was discovered at the Duomo station in Naples relatively recently. So those are two examples of historical artifacts in subway stations. And then Boston, being idiosyncratic, did the obverse. They have a subway station in an historical building. So that is the old State House, 1713. And where that arrow is pointing is the entrance to the Orange Line and Blue Line State Street Station. So that's a brief description of some of the themes in the book. There's still other systems I'd like to visit. There's close to 200 metros worldwide. I'd love to go to Pyongyang as well as Tehran and maybe even Caracas, but I think it's a little too hot right now. I might wait a bit till it's safer to travel there. But hopefully that will give you some sense of the visual culture in these other cities and how each city's subway reflects the character of that metropolis. So if you have an interest, the book's available through the museum bookshop as well as online through Amazon and Barnes and Noble and so forth. So I very much appreciate your interest, and we'll turn it back to Hillary.
Thank you so much, David. That was such a fun kind of trip around the world. It's really amazing to see all of these different stations and systems and all the similarities and then the differences at the same time. So we do have a little time for questions. So if anyone has questions that they would like to ask, please put that in the Q&A session. We have a few here, which I'll go through. I did have one kind of question to start that off. You started off talking about your Seltzer token rating system. I wondered which system you ranked the highest and why.
Yes. Well, actually, there's 5 of the 22 systems there that got perfect 4.0s on each of those 4 criteria. Brussels, London, Madrid, Montreal, and Stockholm. And I'm embarrassed to say that my hometown, my beloved Philadelphia, was the absolute doormat of that ranking system, very last place, but improving.
Nice. Okay, so there's a few different questions. I think some of these are a little bit related. Here's a question. Do you factor in the quality of maintenance in making your kind of rating or choice of system?
Only insofar as it's the visual culture. I don't really focus on on-time performance or mean distance between breakdowns and other metrics that are operational. This was really intended to be the rider's visual experience.
Right. And then in terms of rider experience, does accessibility factor in? I know that that's a big concern here. Just, access to elevators and for folks with disabilities or parents with strollers. Is that something that really impacts the usability, and do you factor that in at all?
Well, I probably should have. The newer systems, clearly have accessibility for people who are not mobile, have some sort of mobility issue. The older systems, that's more challenging. And because I have mobility, I didn't really make special note of that. Maybe that's the second edition. I should refer to that.
Right. There was actually another question about Philadelphia. I know you've said it's the worst. Is there anything interesting about the system to share or any highlights at all?
Yeah. So let me give a little. First of all, it's improving. They're working on it. It is one of the older systems, and outside of New York, it's the only system that has a 4-track, express and local subway system. They originally had much grander plans for it. There is one station right by Independence Hall. I hope everyone comes in 2026 to visit for the semi-quincentennial, that has a beautiful immersive art installation there. And some of us are trying to encourage the transit agency, SEPTA, to do the same thing at other stations. So there's a few new or rehabilitated stations there that are attractive, but it could use a little more TLC.
Okay. There was a question about kind of safety. I think this is interesting. What would you say is the safest feeling city and station system?
Ah,
This person said that they thought Tokyo Station was the safest for them.
yeah. Also, Tokyo. If I should have given restrooms 1 to 4 token ratings. Tokyo's restrooms and Seoul's are Four Seasons caliber. Yeah, all the newer Asian systems felt very safe, and even the European ones. And the only nervousness I had, when I was aware of the reputation of Naples is supposed to be the pickpocket capital of the world. And I was very sort of freaked out about it. I didn't have any problem there at all. But when I was in Paris, someone tried to pickpocket me as I was entering the station there. And I was able to use my broken high school French to ward him off with some Anglo-Saxon expletives thrown in for good measure.
Well, hopefully that wasn't a traumatic experience. Um, I know you talked a lot about the artwork and the different systems, and they are so unique. I know here locally, the MTA has a very kind of specific process for how they choose the artwork and make sure it's kind of there's a neighborhood, um, input, and there's committees of people that decide on the artist. Is there any kind of process similar, or like a desire to have local or domestic artists represented?
That too is an excellent question. I really don't know exactly how each city goes about selecting the artwork that goes in there. New York is a model in many respects, but I don't know in Stockholm, for example, or Naples, how much community input there is as opposed to some sort of art commission deciding it. That would be interesting to look into.
Okay, great. Um, there's a question, how did you decide which systems to exclude or include? Was it just basically based on your travels alone, or were there other ones that you could have included?
Yeah, well, I've, as I say, ridden on now maybe 55 different systems. I tried to limit myself to one system per nation, with the exception of the US, where I have 5 systems. And I consider, or Scotland at least, considers itself a separate nation than England. So that's why Glasgow and London could be in there. But if there's demand, I would love to write volume 2 and pick up some of the other cities I overlooked, including like Barcelona in Spain, which is a magnificent system, but I didn't want 2 Spanish systems in the first book.
Great. There's a question about if you had a personal favorite that maybe didn't rank the highest in your rating system, but is something that you think still stands out or you have a personal affinity for?
Kind of like asking someone if they have a favorite child. But I would say actually London, which did get a 4-star Michelin rating from me, or token rating, combination of the system itself, the roundel, which is its symbol, the circle with the horizontal blue stripe, the typeface, the tradition of not so much art installations, but poster art. They've been a leader for a century in really magnificent posters. And I have in the book one page that shows over 100 years, 3 different spectacular posters that just a tip of the iceberg there. So, yeah, lettering, font, posters, design, all of them. That's the one that I think is my favorite.
Okay, well, we have a few more questions, but we're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one more. I figured maybe we could wrap it up. So somebody asked about whether you had visited stations on the African continent, and I thought it would be a good to, what is next for your travels? What's next on your itinerary?
Great question. So I've been on subways in 5 continents. I got Sydney last summer. I'm scheduled to visit Cairo in the next week and a half, and that's on the African continent, obviously. So that will be my 6th continent. I think Antarctica will be a stretch to get a subway there, but I'm proud that I'll have gotten to all 6 continents that have cities with subways.
Well, fantastic. It would be definitely amazing to have a subway on Antarctica.
Yeah.
But hopefully you will be able to continue your travels and have a next iteration of the book because I think it's so much fun. For those of you who have joined us and are interested in purchasing it, we do have it for sale in the store now, which is fantastic. And so we highly recommend you picking it up. Let me see if I can get the link in the chat. A couple here about upcoming programs. Yeah, there we go. You can purchase with the link. Thank you so much, David, for sharing your book and your travels and your experiences. It was really a lot of fun to have this kind of global transit tour. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Just to let you know, so we do have our member sale next week. Our next virtual program is actually not going to be until March, but we are going to be having a new edition of our Mining the Archives series, which will feature a current exhibit on the Materials Inspection Division. So this is a division that existed within transit that scientifically tested materials and chemicals and all sorts of things. Anything that was used throughout the system, they tested it, which is really fun. So that's going to be in March, and all of our programs are again online on our calendar, so we hope to see you at more. Hope you have a good night, and we'll see you next time either at the museum or online. Thanks so much for joining us.